This course is presented to you free of charge by TTJ Tech Services of www.ttjtech.biz and by Stir It Up of www.stiritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with a U, not an I, so that's STURITUP.com. TTJ Tech Services and Stir It Up are pleased to offer this course to you to the glory of God and to the benefit of all those who listen. So once again, welcome to iPad for All Computing, session number 3 today. Praise God. Yes, glory to God. We're excited to have you here. And you're thinking, well, when do we really get to actually use the iPad and try all the amazing things that the iPad can do? And that's going to be next week. We start with that. We're going to be doing screen shares pretty much every class from next week all the way through to the end of the season. And we will be demonstrating things, demoing things, and explaining and teaching and all of that. But this week, we do have 2 more primer sessions. Today's primer is going to be about the specifics of setting up your new iPad if you got one. We're also going to give you a physical tour of the iPad, physical description of it, and then on Wednesday we will discuss Apple accounts and iCloud, which you really do want to have in order to properly use and make the best use of your iPad. Now, we 2 weeks ago, we discussed the different iPad models, which iPad should I buy? So we've gone through all of that. Hopefully, those of you who were planning to get a new iPad have now purchased one. Maybe you even have it in hand already. And we're going to do a bit of a physical overview of the iPad. And one of the things that we have slated to talk about, and we'll either do it today or next week, just depending on time, is some of the iPad accessories that you may want to consider as well. We kind of touched briefly on that a couple weeks ago, but we want to go a little more in depth on that as well. All right, so let's get started with talking about setting up your new iPad. And of course, in order for us to set it up, we do need to have the physical description of it. And so we're gonna kind of go over that with you right now. Most of the iPads, really all of the iPads that you can buy now, new from Apple, are going to have the same overall design in the sense that there's not like a major difference. It's not like one has a home button and one doesn't, right? They're all pretty much the same across the board. There are certainly differences, but the physical form factor is pretty much the same in all of those cases. Now, when we get started next week and we really hit the ground running, learning about different apps on the iPad, learning about the home screen and various orientations and the split screen and all that, you're going to learn very quickly, but I want to touch base on it now because of the setup process. You can use your iPad in absolutely any orientation. And so we want to make sure we have a clear understanding of what orientations are available and what they mean. And the basic orientations, there are just 2, portrait and landscape, and then there are sort of subcategories of those. So the portrait orientation means that you're holding your iPad in a vertical configuration. So if you touch the bottom edge of your iPad, that is, let's say you're holding the iPad straight out in front of you in your hands, the bottom edge that is closest to your body is going to be the side that has the charging port and the connector, which nowadays is all USB-C on all iPads. So you can feel that little connector there at the bottom. And when you're holding the iPad in the true portrait orientation, you're going to have that edge of the iPad closest to your stomach, your chest, whatever part of your body that's, closest to. And then the iPad, as I said, will be kind of in a vertical configuration. Now, it doesn't matter if you're laying it down flat as if it were on a table or a desk, or if you're standing it up in the air, but the direction that it's facing is what I'm focused on right now. And usually when people use it in that portrait orientation, they do hold it upright so that it is not laying down flat, but it could be, but typically they're going to hold it up. And that is sort of the exact same orientation we most commonly think about when we use our iPhones, right? The connectors at the bottom edge. And that's the same general configuration as we're talking about right now with the iPad. So going along with that, then you're going to notice a singular button on the very top edge of the iPad. So the bottom edge has not the bottom of the screen, but the bottom edge, right? Below the screen has the USB-C port on it. And the very top edge has the single button on it. And we're going to just call that the top button. Okay. And regardless of which way you're facing the iPad, we're going to continue to call that the top button. We're not going to say it's the side button or it's the bottom button. We're always going to call it the top button, even if it's not on top at the moment when you face the iPad a different way, because it just avoids confusion. So the top button is that single button that's there, and that will serve multiple purposes. That is kind of the equivalent of the side button on an iPhone. Okay. iPads have top buttons instead. And so that button will wake and sleep the iPad. That button will work with the accessibility shortcut if you triple click when you set that up for VoiceOver or anything else. You can double click that button for Apple Pay, and you can press and hold that button for SIRI. So that is the top button. It serves a number of functions. There may be some that I'm not thinking about right now. In fact, there are like screenshots and other things, but we'll get to that later. But that's the top button. Now, if you have an iPad 10th generation or an iPad Air, that is also the Touch ID button. So if you are setting up Touch ID, we're going to explain that in a few minutes. You're just going to rest your finger on that button. You're not going to press it, but you'll just lay your finger up against it and then remove it. That's how you access Touch ID on models that support that. Presumably, the next iPad, like the 11th generation and so on, will probably also have Touch ID. Again, that's my assumption. That's not been confirmed by Apple. But the iPad Pro has Face ID, so that one does not use the top button for that. That is a different thing, and again, that's Face ID. So we'll talk about that. Now, on the right, again, we're still holding the iPad in this portrait configuration vertically. Bottom edge has the USB-C connector. Top edge has that top button. The right side of the iPad, the right edge, has two buttons, one above the other, and as you might know and might suspect, those are the volume buttons, up and down. And interestingly, what's really cool, because this iPad actually can be used in any orientation, the buttons volume up and volume down will change depending on which way you have the iPad facing, so that they will, how can I put this? The top or right volume button will always increase the volume, and the left one will always decrease. So when you're in landscape, I'll show you that, and I'll explain that in a little more detail. I don't want to muddy the waters right now, but just know those are the volume buttons. They're not specifically designated up and down. It depends on which way the iPad is facing, and then they will adjust accordingly. That makes it easy so that it is consistent with what our minds would expect, that you'd press the right side to raise the volume and so on. So keep that in mind as well. We'll talk more about orientations in a moment. I'm just giving you a brief tour of the iPad first. So you've got right now on the right edge, right side, because that's how we're holding the iPad, you've got two volume buttons, one above the other. All right. And then, of course, if we move our fingers sort of back to where that top button is, we know that behind it on the back of the iPad is the camera system, and that can look slightly different depending on which iPad you have, but they all have cameras there of some sort. And all of the currently available as new iPads have a landscape-facing front camera system. So that means that while you can use the front-facing camera in any orientation, that's not a problem. You can do that. For best results, if you want to make really, really awesome videos and you're going to have, FaceTime calls or Zoom calls and everything, you're really going to be best off to have your iPad in landscape mode, one of the two landscapes, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, so it is a landscape-facing front camera system, and that is true across all the iPads. I don't believe that it's true on the iPad mini. I might be wrong. Don't hold me to that, please, because I did not look that up. I never even thought about it. I apologize. But off the top of my head, I'm sort of thinking that the iPad mini has a portrait facing, front facing camera like the iPhone and like the older iPads. But the iPad 10th generation, the iPad Air, and the iPad Pro all have landscape cameras in the front now. And that's been a much requested feature. I guess people feel it just gives a better viewing angle. It gives better, more real estate. You can get better shots, right? So that's the camera system. You've got any one of a number of microphones around the iPad. The iPad Pro has four microphones, I believe. Studio quality around the iPad positioned in different places, and then like for example the 10th generation iPad rather has like one or two. I think it's actually one maybe, but it's still a really really high quality microphone either way. Now we also have speakers, and of course the iPad 10th generation and the iPad Air, they both have one speaker on the bottom and one speaker on the top, but that does allow for stereo speakers in landscape mode. So when you rotate the iPad to landscape, as we're going to talk about here momentarily, you will have true stereo sound. Now, the iPad Pro actually has four speakers, two on the bottom and two on the top. So you're going to get stereo either way, whichever way you face that iPad, and that's going to be your most robust sound. But again, iPad 10, iPad Air, they still have really, really excellent sound. And I'm not, again, 100% sure of what the Mini has. I think it may have stereo in landscape also, but not 100% sure, so don't hold me to that. All right, so now, we've really talked about all of the critical stuff. The back of the iPad, you'll feel an Apple logo. The other thing that I would point out is that the Apple Pencil can rest on the iPad if you do decide to get an Apple Pencil. We'll talk about the Apple Pencil either today or next Monday, again, depending on time. But if you do decide to get an Apple Pencil, it can be sort of magnetically attached to the iPad, and you will attach it on the same side of the iPad where you feel the two volume buttons that we talked about, just below, or depending on which way it's facing, it may not be below, but right now it is, and just below the volume buttons, I recommend putting the tip of the Apple Pencil, the point closest to the volume buttons. I think you can actually do it the other way also, but you'll feel a little groove on your Apple Pencil, and you can magnetically place the Apple Pencil there against the iPad, and it will stay there. Now, what exactly that does depends on which iPad and which pencil you have. So if you have the iPad Pro and the new Apple Pencil Pro, and actually I think that is the same pencil that's used on the Air and the Mini now, the Apple Pencil Pro will actually charge when it is in that position. That's literally how you charge the Apple Pencil. You just magnetize it to the side of the iPad. There's a special housing inside the iPad there, and it's got a charge coil, and it will charge your Apple Pencil. That's all you ever need to do. You get a new Apple Pencil Pro, you got your iPad Pro, you literally just place that pencil against the side of the iPad, it magnetizes, that will pair with the iPad, and it will charge. And anytime you want to charge the iPad, anytime you want to charge the Apple Pencil Pro, you just magnetize it to the side of the iPad. If you opted for the less expensive but yet still awesome Apple Pencil USB-C, that will not charge on the side of the iPad. Now, that Apple Pencil USB-C is designed to work with the 10th generation iPad, but it also works with the Air and the Pro, and I believe the Mini, in case you want a lower cost option, because the Apple Pencil Pro is like $129 without any discounts. I think the Apple Pencil USB-C is like $79. Basically, it lacks the pressure sensitivity that the Pro has, and just a couple little things. It's basically the same. It's the same technology. You still get the good palm rejection and all these great features, but the Pencil USB-C is a bit less expensive. One of the things you don't get is the inductive charging, I guess you call it, the wireless charging, some people would say, I guess. which would be accurate. And so while that Apple Pencil will still magnetize to the side of the iPad, it's not going to charge. It will just magnetize there. And so if you are, for example, drawing or taking notes with your pencil or something, and you say, well, I'm going to go get a soda and do a few things, and then I'll come back and I'll keep drawing. Well, I don't want to put my pencil away, but I also don't want it to roll off the desk, right? Or off the table. So I'll magnetize it to the side of the iPad, and that still works. It stays there, but it's not going to charge. And that is the same regardless of which iPad you have. If it's the Pro, even though the Pro has the charging coil, the Apple Pencil USB-C does not support that kind of charging. So it doesn't matter which iPad you have. If you have the Apple Pencil USB-C, you don't charge it that way. It will rest there, but it doesn't charge that way. So well, how do you charge it? Well, there's a little cap on the bottom end of the pencil. It's not actually removable. It is a slide cap, and you slide the cap away, and it reveals a USB-C port. So now you can charge it that way. So what you do when you first get your Apple Pencil USB-C, uh, you will actually have to connect it to the iPad to pair it. To do that, you will take a USB-C charge cable, in other words, USB-C on both ends. You'll plug one end into the iPad and the other end into the pencil. You need no power adapter or anything. You just connect the two, make a connection between the pencil and the iPad. That will pair the pencil with the iPad. Now, that's the only time you ever have to do it that way. Once the iPad is paired with the pencil, you can actually charge the pencil by plugging it in with a USB-C cable to a wall charger. So if you have, let's say, a charging adapter plugged into the wall that you use to charge your iPad, well, instead of plugging the cable into the iPad, just plug it into the pencil, and it'll charge the pencil from the wall outlet just like it will charge the iPad. You may want to have a cable, if you're out and about somewhere not near a wall outlet and you need to charge your pencil, then it is convenient to charge it by plugging it into the iPad. And again, this is only for the Apple Pencil USB-C. The Apple Pencil Pro will charge by magnetizing to the side of the iPad. And the second generation Apple Pencil, which is not a new model anymore, but a legacy model that's still available for, let's say, last year's iPad Pro or the previous generation iPad, that will also charge on the side of the iPad. I'm not even going to discuss the first generation Apple Pencil unless somebody has a question about it, because I don't. It's not the one I would recommend anymore for a lot of reasons. Though it is still sold. So that gives you an overview of how the iPad is laid out, the physical description, the charging capabilities, and even the magnetic connector that we talk about for the Apple Pencil. The opposite side of the iPad, like where let me just try to picture this here. I guess it's really on the back of the iPads now is what they call the smart connector, and that is used for different keyboards. And we've talked a little about that, but we'll get a bit more into that later, and that has, to do with your Magic Keyboard and so on. So you might feel that on the back of the iPad, right? There's a lot of magnetic use of magnets in very cool ways, right? Even the non-keyboard smart folios that don't have keyboards in them, but that they're just covers. They're also back protection too. They will magnetize so that, like, you open the cover and it wakes the iPad, and you close the cover and it sleeps the iPad. And you can get these in different colors and so forth, and they are very handy to provide some additional protection for the iPad if you're not using a keyboard. So there's a lot of options. We will talk about how to connect keyboards very quickly, because I think some people may prefer to do their setup with a keyboard since they're maybe not comfortable with the touchscreen yet. I don't do that. I use the on-screen method of setting up, but I will go over right away how to connect keyboards in case you do choose to do that. Because one of the benefits, as Trainer Cliff often points out, one of the benefits of having the smart keyboard is that you don't have to pair it with Bluetooth. So therefore you can use it right out of the box, even during the setup process, if you so choose. So you don't need to wait and then go into settings and Bluetooth, nothing like that. Your keyboard doesn't have to be charged because smart keyboards just get their power from the iPad. So we're basically going to discuss two main keyboards right now because those are the two that are currently available as new. I understand some people may have some other things. You're welcome to ask during the Q&A time, but here at TTJ, we always teach to the latest and the greatest. So I want to teach to what is the newest thing that you could actually go out today to an Apple store or a Best Buy or something and actually purchase, not something left over from a previous model. So we're going to explain how to um, connect the iPad to the Magic Keyboard, not the Bluetooth one, the iPad one, right? And we're going to also explain how to connect the iPad to the Magic Keyboard Folio, which is the one that's designed for the 10th generation iPad. I don't know what the 11th will have when that's released. Most likely the same keyboard. I don't know that they'll need to redesign that or choose to, but again, we're just speculating right now. So if you have an iPad Air or an iPad Pro, yours is going to be the Magic Keyboard. Now, when you get that Magic Keyboard out of the box, it's going to kind of feel like an iPad, except it's going to be like a book. You can open it, and when you open it, you'll feel that there's like a metal palm rest with the whole full-size keyboard. And then the other side of the book, if you want to look at it like a book, is like a soft microfiber kind of place with a square camera cutout on one part of it. Well, common sense will guide you here, I think, right? That you have to align the back camera of your iPad with the camera hole on that microfiber part of the unit so that the iPad is going to rest against that microfiber. And I think if you feel, let me take mine off because I am actually using it that way right now, but let me just pull it off. Hopefully that wasn't too noisy for you. I moved my hands around. You might hear that a little. Okay. Yeah. What I wanted to confirm is you can actually feel on the microfiber. There's the one side where the camera hole is. The other side that's going to be like the facing to the right. It has these like three little dots. That's where the smart connector has to align. Excuse me a moment while I put this back on the keyboard. It might be a little noisy for just a second. All right, now you see how quickly that happened, right? How easy that was for me to put it on there. So that's what you're going to do. So what you do is you just line up the iPad with the camera part, and then it just sort of goes against there. And I'm going to unmute Trainer Sarah. I don't know that Trainer Cliff's going to be able to unmute today, because I know he's got some job related stuff going on that he had to participate in. But I'm going to unmute Sarah and just see if she has any advice, because everybody looks at things differently when you haven't seen with your eyes, and maybe she's got some tips and tricks because she uses this keyboard. I mean, it's the previous model, but it's still the Magic Keyboard. So give me a moment. And praise God, what a great crowd we've got today. Let's take a look and see. All right, I'm going to, I know we usually wait till the end, but see if she has any tips on this as well, because
Hi.
hi, how you doing?
Good. Um, did you just want comments on the keyboard?
Well, in particular, the like I'm explaining to everybody how to connect the two. I mean, to
Yeah,
me, it's just real easy. You just line it up. I mean, and it just sort of goes in place, right? But I mean, do you have
yeah.
any other
No,
pointers?
just that of course the camera, which it juts out a little bit. It's going to fit into the hole that
Right,
is provided,
right.
and so it's kind of you sort of have to do it that way. There's no other way to do
Yeah,
it. They
that's what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is the magnet is so powerful in the connecting the keyboard to the iPad, that that is also, sort of fail safe, and
Right,
it's just going to click into place. Just yeah, there will be no question that it's connected.
right.
Um, Recently, I've found that my keyboard was not responding to things that I wanted it to do on the
Oh.
iPad, and I was like, "Uh-oh, have we worn it out?" And I just took it off, I just disconnected it and put it back on. It was completely fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like, turning your phone on and off or
Right,
whatever. Yeah.
right.
So I
Okay.
do not have a pencil, so I don't use any of that.
Right. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. So as we said, that's really it. There's only one way to do it, and I think you'll feel it and it won't be any trouble. Um, what you're left with, you'll notice once that is done, is that the iPad um is up against that microfiber part and is standing up in landscape mode like the screen of a laptop. So we need to talk about landscape mode. I told you what portrait was, right? Portrait is when we hold the iPad vertically, buttons, volume buttons on the right, top button really at the top, connector at the bottom. Now, if we rotate the iPad so that it would be facing what we think of as sideways, now that is going to be landscape. So now it's longer. You have much longer from left to right of the screen. And there are two different ways you can use the iPad in portrait mode and two different ways you can use it in landscape mode. Pretty self explanatory, right? You can use it in landscape mode with the charge port facing to the right, or you can use it in landscape mode with the charge port on the left. Now, when you are using the Magic Keyboard, the charge port is always going to be on the right. So you are in landscape with the charge port to the right as long as you are connected to the Magic Keyboard. That is the only orientation that you can use the Magic Keyboard in because, again, it has to be where it lines up with that camera cutout, and the other side is where the port is. What's nice about the Magic Keyboard is that Apple has actually provided a charge port on the left-hand side of the Magic Keyboard. So again, when you're in the Magic Keyboard, on the right-hand side is the USB-C port. It's on the right of your iPad, the way that it's facing, and it's always going to be as long as you leave it in that Magic Keyboard case. This can be a problem if you are trying to work and charge your battery at the same time, because let's say you're sitting in a chair where the plug's on your left-hand side. Well, there's nothing you can do about that, right? You're not going to stretch the cord across the iPad. Even if you could do that, it's not going to be very practical. But what they've given you is they've given you a charge port on the left-hand side of the keyboard. You got to kind of reach. What I would suggest is take your finger. It's actually easier to feel the way it's designed on the new Magic Keyboard, but it works on both. I would take your finger up to the very top row of keys, come around to the back, and then it's like a little metal strip behind the keyboard, and that's where you find the USB-C port on the left-hand side. And so you can plug in a cable there for pass-through charging to charge the iPad. You cannot use, according to Apple, at least in the previous model. I haven't checked this recently, but you cannot use the keyboard's charge port to plug in like flash drives or hard drives or something. You need to actually use the iPad for that, but you could plug in a cable to charge the iPad to that pass-through port. All right. So again, that is the Magic Keyboard, and that also tells us about the orientations, right? We can use landscape with the charge port to the right. And if we're not connected to the Magic Keyboard and we just want to use the iPad in landscape mode, we can also use it with the charge port to the left. And it is going to be our recommendation here at TTJ that you use your iPads in landscape mode, even if you're not connected to a keyboard. You don't have to. There's no right or wrong. It's not like things are going to work improperly if you don't. But we just feel that landscape mode, whether it is with the charge port to the left or to the right, that landscape mode gives you the best experience for the screen real estate that you have. You'll get a full-sized on-screen keyboard if you're typing on screen. The iPhone is a different animal. The iPhone really feels to me like it wants to be a portrait device because of its size. And I suppose the iPad mini might feel that way. I don't use it enough to really have an opinion. But the normal full-sized iPads, you start getting into the 10.9 inch, 11 inch, 13 inch, and I just think that the um, landscape mode is going to be the way to go. So when we teach in this course, we're going to be teaching primarily with landscape mode in mind. Okay. And again, it doesn't matter whether you use it with the charge port to the left or to the right. The only way it would matter is if you're using the keyboard, and then you have to have the charge port to the right. But you'll see that for yourself. And then I told you there were two portrait modes too. That's because technically you can use the iPad upside down, and they call it portrait flip, but it rotates. So here's what you need to understand. The screen will always rotate. So if you ever hear somebody talk about things like, relative direction, or like, true north, or these kinds of things, right? It's the same idea. Like, okay, if I say to you, this icon is on the top right of the screen, it's really it's whatever way the iPad is facing, it's the new top right. You're always going to lift your hand up and to the right. Okay. I don't know how else to say that. I ran into some students over the years who were confused by that because they didn't see it and I didn't make it clear. And we just kind of had trouble getting on the same page when I'd say, well, it's at the top right. Like they were trying to picture, okay, where's the real top right of the iPad, even though I'm not facing it that way anymore. Well, no, that's not what we mean. The screen rotates to accommodate whichever way you are holding the iPad. So if I'm holding the iPad sideways, doesn't matter. The top right of the screen is still going to be whatever is top and right now. Okay, so it should be. I don't want to make too much of that because I don't want to add confusion where there is none, but I want to at least address that briefly because as I said, it actually was an issue. In a prior situation. So we make sure people understand that the screen rotates. All right. Now, if you have your orientation lock on, that could be a problem. Then the screen won't rotate, right? So, when the orientation lock is off, the screen will rotate. Is there a reason to use or not use the orientation lock? It's personal preference. Um, I don't recommend it for the exact reason that I just said to you, because if you turn the orientation lock on, then the screen is never going to rotate. You're pretty much going to be, well, never's a bit strong because there might be some apps that force it to, but basically you're going to be forced to use it in whatever direction you locked it to, right? So if you were in landscape mode and you had the charge port to the right, and you lock the orientation, no matter which way you turn that iPad, that screen's not going to move now. So you're always going to have to use it in landscape mode with the charge port to the right. If you leave the orientation lock disabled, then you can turn the iPad whichever way you want and simply use it normally, including on the home screen, because on an iPad, you can even rotate the orientation on the home screen. Okay. But some people don't like that. Some people, that gets in the way. They want to be able to move their iPad a certain way and not have it suddenly rotate the screen for them. So again, there's no right or wrong. It's personal preference, but I'm explaining to you why I don't use the orientation lock, why I leave it unlocked, because I like the flexibility of being able to turn the iPad whichever way I want to turn it, and then still have the screen be in the proper orientation for me and rotate along with it. All right, so we've covered a lot here with these orientations and with portrait versus landscape. We've covered one keyboard, the Magic Keyboard. We also have to talk about the Magic Keyboard Folio that is specifically designed only for the iPad 10th generation right now. And this one is a two-piece design. So when you get this, you're going to get two pieces. You're going to get the part with the keyboard in it. That is the top part that covers the screen. You're also going to get the back cover, and the back cover can be placed on the iPad without using the screen keyboard part. That way it's a two-piece design, so you can use it either way. So what I recommend that you do is put that back cover on first. Get that lined up. Again, you'll know because of the camera bump. And then place the other piece on. And again, I think you'll be able to tell because it's got to be able to unfold so that the keyboard comes towards you in a way that you can use it properly. The trackpad will be at the bottom, the keys will be above it. And so you'll be able to feel that. The difference with this one is because it's a two-piece design and because of the way they've designed it, the way you stand the iPad up, because you don't if you try to open that iPad so that the keyboard is um on your
On
lap
the
so you
top.
can right so you can use it properly, then the iPad screen's going to be way out at the other end and it's not practical for most people. But what they've put a kickstand on the back of the case, and so you can adjust that kickstand so that the iPad is up at an angle instead of on the Magic Keyboard that Sarah and I use. Then you're adjusting the iPad itself. It like floats above the keyboard like a laptop screen. You can angle it different views, all of these kinds of things. So, um,
I also wanted to just let people know that if they want to start choosing between the rotating the screen and locking it, it's in the control panel in the control center. So that's easy to, rotate it, lock the screen or
that's
not
right. That's
if they
right. It is.
decide that they do not like what it is that they've set it up to do.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And the control center, we're going to teach that next week. Okay. But basically, if you don't find, and I don't even remember, I think it is in there by default, but if you don't find the orientation lock control in the control center, you can add it because there's an edit button at the very top of the control center and you can add additional control. I actually think it says add controls, and you can go in there and you can edit the ones that are there or you can add more. And orientation lock is definitely one of the options. So yes, yep. All right. So that gives you kind of an overview of the way that the
Yeah, I just looked it up. It says more controls.
more controls, more
Yeah.
controls. Okay, thank you. Yep. Yep. So if you don't see, and again, we're going to go over the control center next week in detail, but if you don't see orientation lock there or anything else that you want or expect, you can go to more controls. You can add things, you can reorder things, um, and certainly you can remove things that you don't want as well. Now, that gives you an idea of the physical layout of the iPad and some of the most common accessories, the way to connect them. If you still have questions, we'll have a Q&A period at the end. And of course, tomorrow, a help session. And then certainly we offer the paid one-on-one training as well. So if you need anything further on that, just let us know. And certainly there are other keyboards. I'm not naive to the fact that there are lots of other, Cliff uses the Logitech Combo Touch. Some people use a Bluetooth keyboard. There are other models by Logitech. There are Zag. There's a whole bunch of different options. And it's not my intent to pretend that my overview here was the be all end all, right? I'm just picking the ones that are the Apple branded, that are the most common, probably, or at least the ones that you could walk into an Apple store and pick up that are made by Apple. So, if you have questions about ones that go beyond that, we may or may not be able to assist you with them, just depending on what they are and whether we've used them or not.
Although Cliff does claim to be the keyboard king, so
Well, that is true. That
he
he's
should,
had a lot of experience with a lot of keyboards.
yeah, so he should be able to give advice on that one.
Right. All right. So now what about when we go to actually turn on the iPad and we start to set it up and just go over a few highlights here today. Before you begin, I highly encourage you to make sure that you know your Wi-Fi network name and password. Not going to really be able to do a whole lot if you don't. I highly encourage you to make sure that you already have an Apple account. They used to call them Apple ID. Technically, they don't anymore. That term is still seen periodically floating around, but technically they want you to call it an Apple account now. Um, you want to make sure you have one of those and that you know what it is, right? An Apple account has an email address and it has a password. You make sure you know what those are. Now, I'm going to tell you a way to avoid having to enter all that information as well, but it's still good to know that as a backup just in case you need it. And then if you don't have an Apple account yet, we're going to talk on Wednesday about why that's so important, what services are available, the different iCloud features and other things that the Apple account gives you. But for today, just let me say it's really, really important to have one with your Apple devices. And if you already have an iPhone, chances are you probably do have one. But I still want to stress it because it's just so critical. They're used to every time I do this, I tell this story. So some of you have heard this about a dozen times and you know what I'm going to say. But there used to be a commercial on when I was a kid for Tic Tacs, and they would say, "Can you breathe without a Tic Tac?" And I'd say, "Of course." But I wouldn't recommend it. Well, that was always the joke with that. But I say that, with the Apple account. Can you use an Apple device without an Apple account? Well, sure you can, but I really don't recommend it because there's so many benefits, functionality, features, and so on that you're going to have when you sign in with an Apple account, namely iCloud, right? In and of itself, that's enough to persuade, should be enough to persuade you to get an Apple account if you don't already have one. They're free. They're free. And you can use your existing email address. If you have a Gmail or an Outlook or a Comcast or a whatever, you can use that email address as your official Apple ID, Apple account, whatever. But also, if you don't have an email address that you want to use, you can create one at iCloud.com, and that can be your default Apple account. So there's ways to do this. And the nice thing is you can do it right on your iPad when you turn it on and begin the setup. If you don't have an Apple account, you can create one. You can also go to, and I think the web address has even changed now. It might still work both ways, though. So I'm going to give you both because I think you can go still to appleid.apple.com. But I think really where they want you to go now is like account.apple.com. So they've just changed that, to suit the new naming conventions there. But you can do it right on the device, and then you don't even have to go to a website. But let's say you're really not comfortable with the iPad yet, and you want to use your, PC or whatever to create the Apple account. You can do that from a website. And so we really want to, again, on Wednesday, this Wednesday, we'll go over why and how and what's so great about it and all that. But for today, just know that we want to have one. And if we already do, we want to know our Apple account email address and password. And if we have an iPhone already, or possibly an old iPad or something that we're replacing, it's really a good idea to have two-factor authentication enabled for our Apple account. Now, we're going to have a class much later on, closer to the end of the season in May. I think it is. It might be April, but it's either late April or early May, somewhere around there, or maybe a little after that is about the security features, the privacy features. And we kind of have already done that this season. We did it in the fall in our voiceover course, right? We called it Staying Safe in a Digital World. But we always revisit that from the perspective of each device because it's so critical. And when we do that, we'll talk about why two-factor authentication is so important, so crucial. A lot of things that we have out there's a lot of malicious people. My parents just over the weekend, my mom called me and said, "I can't believe this." She said, I just found out that one of my bank accounts was hacked. What they found out was somebody hacked the debit card number and took about $1,000 out of their account. And now, praise God, the bank's going to make that right. They'll get their money back. And, they replaced their card. So that card number is not going to be usable anymore. So, praise God, everything's okay. But it's just the idea there's this stuff out there and you want to take the earthly protections that you can. Two-factor authentication is a really powerful one. And so, we recommend having that enabled. We're going to, as I said, discuss that later on. But these are just kind of before you begin, just to think about these things. Make sure you know what your passwords are in case you need to enter them. Now, I'm going to tell you a way that you don't have to enter them, but it's still just knowing that you have them. So now we're going to get started setting up our new iPad. What we want to do is if we have another Apple device already, like an iPhone, we want to make sure that iPhone has power, that it's on, that it's on the correct Wi-Fi network, presumably our home Wi-Fi, that it is signed into the correct Apple account, and we do have two-factor enabled. And again, we want to have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned on that iPhone. Okay. Common sense for most people, probably, but still doesn't hurt to reiterate it, I don't think. So now we've got that iPhone ready. We're going to have the iPhone unlocked, keep it awake, just keep it on the home screen. And we're going to turn on our iPad by pressing and holding that top button for about 5 seconds. If we can see, we'll see an Apple logo. If not, just count about to 5 and let it go. And then wait about another maybe 20 seconds or 30, something like that. And then you can turn VoiceOver on if you are a VoiceOver user. If not, you can proceed without VoiceOver. But remember that if you are a VoiceOver user, if you turn VoiceOver on now, you'll have VoiceOver all the way through the setup process, and it will automatically configure the accessibility shortcut to VoiceOver so that in the future you can triple click that top button to turn VoiceOver on and off. So that's a good thing if you are a VoiceOver user, after you turn the iPad on and wait a few seconds, then press that top button 3 times and turn on VoiceOver. Now you'll be able to begin setting up the iPad. And what will happen is you'll choose your language and your region. And at about that same time, remember that unlocked iPhone that I told you was sitting there awake at the home screen? It's going to have a message that pops up on it. If you bring it close to your iPad, bring the two devices physically close together. And it's going to say, do you want to use this iPhone to set up your new iPad? You just say continue. And it's going to, I think, make you use your Face ID or some form of authentication on your phone to confirm that you really want to do this. And then it's just going to tell you to keep your iPhone near your iPad. And what they'll do is they'll ask you to pair the two devices together by positioning the camera of one device in the frame of the other. Now, I will tell you this right off the bat. I know sighted users, fully sighted users, who struggle with this. I've seen some that don't struggle with it, but I've also seen plenty of sighted users that do struggle with it. And so even for sighted users, what you can do, and certainly for a VoiceOver user, if you don't want to bother with trying to line those two devices up with the cameras, is choose the option that says authenticate manually. And what that will do is it will display a 6-digit code on the one device and an edit field on the other device where you have to enter that code. Once you do, the two devices are paired. Again, just keep them in close physical proximity, and you'll be able to set up the iPad from the iPhone or an old iPad or whatever. What is it actually setting up? Well, it's going to automatically join the same Wi-Fi network and join the same Apple account. So you don't have to bother with entering those passwords. You don't have to bother with manual two-factor authentication. It's going to sign everything into both devices. Now, by default, it's also going to want to restore from the backup of the device that you are using to set it up. But you don't have to do that. You can set up your iPad by restoring from a different backup, or even not restoring at all, just setting it up as new. When you are in the setup process, there will be a button that says, I think it says customize or view more options or choose custom options, something like that. And you'll be able to choose the apps and data option. Do I want to restore from this iPhone that I was using to set it up? Do I want to set it up, not restore, which is set up as new? Do I want to choose a different backup? You have all these options, right? And so I want to point that out because a lot of people make some mistakes because they've just never been taught, not criticizing anybody, right? It's just they don't know. And so they'll make one of two mistakes. They'll either say, well, I don't want to set it up from this iPhone because I don't want the backup from that iPhone. Well, it doesn't matter. You can use the iPhone just to get the correct Wi-Fi and Apple account information and then choose not to restore from that iPhone as a backup. That's not a problem. The other mistake people will make is they'll say, well, it would be nice to set it up as new because I have a lot of clutter on this other device, So I would enjoy setting it up as new, except I don't want to lose all my, calendar events, my photos, my, settings and all that stuff. Well, here again, the good news is a lot of that stuff does not require a backup, right? Because iCloud stores your contacts. iCloud stores your calendars. iCloud stores your photos, your Safari bookmarks, your documents, anything in iCloud Drive, even in many cases, although not all cases, but in many cases, even your game progress. If the app has a server or iCloud syncing or Game Center, right? Even your game progress on your favorite games is stored, and so you don't have to restore from a backup to still have all of your content. The only difference is if you don't restore from a backup, there are going to be some settings that don't automatically get set, maybe like your wallpaper the way you want it, or your rotor settings for voiceover or something like that. You might have to do manually. And also any app that you want that's not already pre-installed, you're going to have to go to the App Store and re-download it, but it'll still be free. You won't have to pay for it a second time. It's just you have to manually download it again. Now, depending on how many apps people have installed, that may be enough to convince them, oh, yeah, I definitely want to restore from a backup because I'm not going to go through the App Store searching for all these apps. But I have often taken the other approach with my iPads. A lot of times when I get a new iPad, not all the time, but a lot of times when I get a new iPad, I actually do set it up as new. I use the quick start, that automatic setup I described, where you hold the two devices up to one another to copy the Wi-Fi and so forth. I do use that. But then a lot of times I'll set the iPad up as new because I just want a clean start. Now, when I got my iPhone 15 Pro, absolutely not. I restored it from my 14 Pro because in that case, there was, in my opinion, too much stuff. I didn't want to have to manually re-download everything. And so it's personal preference, but I just want to let you know that the backup is not the only way to get your photos, your contacts, your calendars, all of those things. If you are using iCloud already on your other device, like your iPhone, if you go into settings and tap on your name and you then tap on, actually, you don't even have to tap on your name, just go to the bottom and tap on iCloud. I forget that they've added that in there now. So you just go to settings and then scroll way down to iCloud, and then you'll see all these different things you can turn on or off: photos, calendars, contacts, Safari, passwords, I don't know, mail, voice memos, right? Just a whole bunch of things. And the more apps you have, the more there will be there probably. But as long as they're all turned on, they're going to be synced with iCloud to a new device, even if you don't restore that device from a backup. So it's super easy. You set up your device as new, and you open calendar, you open reminders, you open notes. And I will say it might take a few seconds to a few minutes, depending on the speed of your internet connection or how many you've got to sync. So, like, if you set it up as new and you open notes and all of a sudden it says no notes, but you know that you have a bunch, don't panic. Just give it time. Give it a couple minutes. If it hasn't loaded anything within 3 or 4 minutes, maybe force quit the Notes app and relaunch. It will load. All right. Praise God. Just give it time because it's downloading all of that stuff from iCloud, but it will work. So as long as you have Notes enabled on both devices for iCloud, you don't actually need to restore from a backup to get your notes. All right. So this is, I think, a useful tidbit because backups are great. I mean, that truly is a blessing from God, and they're wonderful. And I have used them at times, and it's great to have backups. But if you've been working off of the same configuration for years and years, you might also have a very, very cluttered device that has a lot of stuff that you haven't gone through and deleted. And you may have things in your backup that you don't care about anymore, or you may not like the way that you have the home screen set up. You just never took the time to do anything about it. So, in those cases, then I always find I'm better off. I like to set it up as new and just download what I want. And, as I said, I didn't do that on the iPhone. Every few years, I do it on the iPad. So that just gives you an idea about the setup process. The other thing I want to talk about very quickly with the iPad setup, and this actually happens even before you decide about your custom options and apps and data and all that stuff. But I want to point out about the biometric authentication because every iPad is going to have some. It's either going to be Touch ID in the top button or it's going to be Face ID. And you will need to set that up. And you have to follow the prompts. So let's talk about Touch ID first, and then we'll talk about Face ID. With Touch ID, you're using your fingerprint, and it's going to ask you to hit continue, and then it's going to walk you through. If you have voiceover on, it'll say place your finger, lift your finger. And it'll just keep saying that because what it's doing is it's capturing all of your finger and it's enrolling that fingerprint into the Touch ID. And so I like to use, for example, my pointer finger, my index finger, and I just place your finger. So you're just going to cover the top button completely, but not press it. Don't press the button. Just rest your finger against it. Lay it there and then lift it up, remove it. Okay. Lay it there, take it away. You probably have to do that about a dozen times and maybe move your finger ever so slightly each time so you know that it's getting a different part. And then it'll say, keep going to capture the edges. So on the screen, you'll find the continue button. And again, you'll place your finger on that top button and lift it a few more times. And finally, it'll tell you that it's complete. And then it's going to tell you to rotate the iPad to enroll a second finger. And that way, you can, and you don't have to, you can skip that. But I do like to do it because that way, then whichever orientation I have the iPad in, I can use either index finger, for example, for Touch ID. So it's just rest your finger and lift it. Very, very simple. You want to make sure, that your fingers are dry. If you've just washed your hands, you might wait a few minutes, right? Because that affects things, if certain factors like that. And you can always enroll more fingers later. I think you can have up to 5. And one of our instructors on the team, Trainer Lynn, used to talk about how, due to various factors, her fingerprints would often stop working after a while on the iPad or iPhone. So what she'd do is she would use all 5 fingerprints that she was allowed to enroll, but she'd use the same finger for all 5 of the fingerprints. So it's just giving it more of a chance, more of an opportunity to capture her finger. And my dad used to kind of have that issue because of I think rheumatoid arthritis or something, it affects his fingers. And actually he doesn't have any Touch ID devices anymore now. He's got all Face ID, but really that's, kind of the factor there. So just be aware of that, but it's very straightforward, very easy to set up. You'll have a device passcode also. If you have one on the other device, it'll ask you to enter that first, but then you can set your own. So we highly recommend that. And, you don't need the passcode except when you restart the device or after, certain other events. But basically, it's a good thing to have that there. There are certain features that may not work if you don't. So it's going to ask you to create a 6-digit passcode, and we encourage that. You can create other kinds if you want. They have alphanumeric. You can create, even longer ones, but I just use the 6-digit one usually. So that's Touch ID. And now let's talk about Face ID. If you're using an iPad Pro, it's going to use Face ID to authenticate you. And I believe on the new iPad Pro, actually, if I remember correctly, from when I set mine up, I think it makes you rotate the iPad to landscape mode to set up Face ID because of the new landscape camera. And it says on there, once you have it set up, you can unlock in any orientation with Face ID. You don't have to be in landscape in the future to actually use it. But I do think they make you, if you're not already, rotate to landscape mode for the setup process. And then what you're going to do is you're going to, just like if you've ever done this with the phone, it's the same idea, but you're going to sit a little bit away from it. I think it's too much to say an arm's length, because if I hold my arm straight out, that's way further away than you need to be. But you need to be a few inches away. In case somebody doesn't know this, I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence here, but when you can't see, I don't know what everybody does or doesn't know, because I wouldn't have known this unless I was told. It's sort of counterintuitive, right? Like when we want to make sure that somebody hears us, we get closer to them, right? If you want to tell somebody a secret, you get up real close. Well, we kind of think the same is true with visual stuff, but it's actually not. Because what happens is when you get too close to some object, you narrow the field of view so much that you're not really getting the picture you need to get. This is the same when you're using your camera to take pictures or scan QR codes too. You want to be a little bit of a distance away. Well, the same is true with Face ID. You're not going to want to be right up against that screen or that camera. You pull it back a little bit. And then what they're going to do, again, you hit the get started button on screen. And what they're going to, and the iPad will make this little sound. It's like, ooh, 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 like that. It's just like this little capturing sound. But VoiceOver will also tell you which way to turn your head. And the gist of this is you're going to make a circle with your head. If you've ever done those exercises where for example, bring your chin to your chest and then roll your head around in a circle. Well, that's kind of what we're doing here, except we don't need to bring our chin to our chest. And really, we don't want to unless we're told to. But we're going to rotate our head in a circle. Now, what I have found with using VoiceOver to set up Face ID is you really need to wait for VoiceOver to prompt you as to what to do next. Don't try to think for it, or don't try to overthink it and move your head ahead of time, because then you'll get your face out of view and it'll make you start over. Wait for it to say, and it will say, like, tilt your head up and to the right, tilt your head back, tilt your head down and to the left. Like, it will tell you every direction that you need to move your head, as long as you are willing to wait for it to say it. You got to wait a few seconds, but it will tell you. And so that's really the best way to set it up with VoiceOver. The very, very first time I ever set up Face ID on my iPhone 10, my son wanted to help set up the new phone, and I didn't have VoiceOver on because he wanted to do it. And so he was standing there, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do with my head. So he actually came up behind me and moved my head in the correct direction so I would know what to do. But that's the only time he's ever had to do that. Now I know the pattern, and the only thing I had to learn after, a few device setups, because you don't do it that often, but, after 2 or 3 of them, I realized you got to wait if you're using VoiceOver and let it tell you when to turn your head, which way to turn it. And then you're going to be fine. So it's a really smooth process. It works great with VoiceOver. And while we're talking about that, I want to dispel some myths about Face ID and cover a couple of additional tidbits with Face ID. Okay. So let's get these myths out of the way first. Things that people believe about Face ID that are absolutely not true. All right. Myth number 1, you have to actually have real eyes and be able to make proper eye contact with your device to use Face ID. Absolutely not true. Now, there is a setting that requires you to look at your device. I'll share that in a moment, not yet. But for right now, just know that it's absolutely not true. I have artificial eyes. Trainer Cliff has artificial eyes. You don't need real eyes to use Face ID. Second one, myth number 2. The lighting in the room must be good in order to use Face ID. Absolutely false. Face ID does not depend on lighting conditions. It doesn't work that way. It's not using light sensors. It's using dot projectors. I don't even know if I understand that well enough to explain it. It doesn't matter. The point is, it does not require the light to be a certain way. I have used Face ID in bright sunlight. I have used Face ID in the middle of the night in a room with no lights turned on. It works perfectly just the same. You do not have to worry about the lighting conditions when you are using Face ID. Next one. My appearance has to be exactly the same in order to use Face ID. Again, completely false. Whether or not you wear makeup one time and take your makeup off the next, whether or not I used to have a completely clean shaven face. I've since started growing a beard. That beard changes in thickness over the weeks. Doesn't make any difference. Glasses don't make any difference. Now, maybe a really, really thick pair of sunglasses might prevent Face ID from working properly, but typically glasses don't make any difference. You're still recognized. There's very little that you're going to do to trick or to cause Face ID to stumble. It usually works pretty well. If you're having any issues, what you need to do is think about the proximity of your face to the device and the way in which you are holding the device. On the iPad, as long as the whole iPad is kind of level with your face, it really doesn't matter. Just hold it out in front of you and sit normally. And if you've got it on the Magic Keyboard, it's kind of already positioned properly. So you just unlock it and it works. It just really does work. So not much to think about and to be concerned about with Face ID. Now, there are two settings that people often get confused. And again, I'm not being critical. I'm not, but I want you to know the correct thing so you don't find yourself frustrated. There are two different settings that almost sound the same in name. One of them is attention aware features. The other one is require attention. They sound similar. They're extremely different. And a lot of times I've seen people quote the wrong one. And they'll say, well, because I'm blind, I need to turn off the attention aware features. Absolutely not true. You don't want to turn off the attention aware features, probably. I mean, maybe you do, but it's not going to have the result you think it's going to have. Attention aware features are not what most people are referring to when they're talking about that. What do the attention aware features do? They allow, and I have not even looked on the iPad, truthfully, to see if this is a thing, but I know it is on the iPhone. So I'm just assuming, right? But maybe it doesn't even matter. But they allow you, for example, let's say your alarm starts ringing on your iPhone or you get a telephone call. When I pick up my phone and bring it up to my face, it detects that it's near my face. And so it quiets the alarm or it quiets the ringtone. Another thing is if I keep it in front of my face, it won't let the phone go to sleep, even if the sleep timer is set, not the sleep timer, but the auto lock is set to, 30 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever it's set for. If it sees that it's up in front of my face, it's not going to lock the phone. That's attention aware features. Okay. The one most people are talking about is the one that requires you to look at your iPhone in order to unlock it. And that is called require attention. Two different settings. That one's called require attention. And it is the setting that asks you to look at your phone or iPad in order to actually unlock it. Now, two things. Number one, if you have VoiceOver turned on when you set up Face ID, the require attention feature will automatically be disabled. Not the attention aware, but the require attention, the one that makes you look at your phone or iPad, it's automatically going to be disabled when you use VoiceOver during the setup of Face ID. If you did not have VoiceOver on during the setup, you can go in there and you can disable require attention later. But I'll also go a step further and say that Trainer Cliff, blind since the age of 3, with artificial eyes, says that he has the require attention turned on and he's able to use it. He's able to look at it. I'm sure that's different for each person. Maybe some people couldn't, but he can. And the reason that he used to want to turn that on, if I remember correctly, is he was concerned that maybe, one time he'd be asleep and one of his kids would take his phone and use his face to, purchase something or whatever. So he made sure he left that on. So he's got to look at his phone. And again, I understand maybe some people couldn't make the eye contact, but I'm saying all that to say, don't automatically assume. If you want to try that feature, don't automatically assume that it's not going to work just because you're blind. You may be able to actually use it. Now, I don't. I've left that off just because I never even bothered to try it. I don't really have any concerns about it. And I just, I figure maybe I could make the eye contact. Maybe it would add hassle. I don't know. I'm just going to leave it disabled. But that was disabled by default anyway, because I set it up with VoiceOver. But not the required, but the attention aware, praise God, I do leave that one enabled because I like that. If my alarm's going off, I pick up the phone and I sort of, I don't even really have to per se glance at it. I just kind of hold it up in front of my face and turn my face towards it. Well, it then quiets the alarm. It doesn't snooze it. I still have to do that on screen if I want to, or stop it. It just makes it softer. So it's, there's some useful stuff there to look at and think about in your Face ID settings. And similar to Touch ID, you can have more than one facial profile. Now, as I said, you can have up to 5 fingerprints with Touch ID. There's only 2 with Face ID, and they call it alternate appearance. It's not really designed for a second person. So people with the Touch ID, when they saw that they could have 5 fingerprints, like they'd say, well, I'm going to give my wife and my son and my daughter, whatever, I'm going to give them a fingerprint, kind of thing. When the Face ID really isn't designed to do that. I suppose you could try it. I don't know what the results would be, but it really is designed for an alternate appearance for you. So if you do look extremely different for some reason, or you're having trouble with it, you can have an extra appearance enrolled in there just in case. So that is the overview of Face ID, Touch ID, and how to set up your iPad. And the last thing I'll point out here is one of the other things it's going to ask you about. I'm not, covering everything step by step. You follow the instructions and read it, you'll be able to do it. But I will point out one other thing. They're going to, well, 2 other things. They're going to ask you to enable location services. I highly encourage that. And they're going to ask you to set up, if you already have an Apple account and you already have like a payment method on file with Apple Pay and so forth, they're going to ask you for the security code for the credit card that you have, unless it's like Apple Card, where it's part of, your like Apple Card is Apple, right? So that's automatic. It'll just set that up. But if you have any other credit cards on file or debit cards or whatever, it's going to ask you to enter the security 3 or 4 digit security code from that credit card. So be aware that you may have to do that as well. And again, if you can always say do it later, but I recommend just getting it done. If you can do it, then everything's all set up. And there is, I said one more thing, but there's another thing. There is the Siri setup. And typically for most people, if you've already got devices, it's not going to make you speak to your device and retrain it. But in some cases it might, and it'll say like, okay, say, hey, SIRI, what's the weather? And then it'll say, hey, SIRI, set a timer. It'll make you do that, but typically not once you already have some devices set up. It is going to give you kind of an overview on the devices that support Apple Intelligence. It's going to give you kind of an overview of how to use SIRI with Apple Intelligence. There's nothing to actually try there. It's just like hit continue each time. It's like a, 3 or 4 step sort of tutorial screen that talks to you about Apple Intelligence. And so, you can just read through that and hit continue. And eventually your device is going to be set up and it says swipe up to go home. And you'll just do the go home gesture, which we talked about. Again, you touch the bottom edge and you hear the little blip sound if you're a voiceover user, and you swipe up. So that really does complete the iPad setup process.
Thanks for joining today's session. Didn't get your question answered? Have an additional comment or feedback? Email us info@ttjtech.biz or info@stirritup.com. And remember, stir is spelled with a U. That's STURITUP.com. Or check out our websites for additional resources. That's ttjtech.biz or stirritup.com. And remember, subscribe to the newsletter when you're there. That way, you don't miss out on any upcoming announcements or events. Thanks for joining us. God bless, and see you next time.